Fox News Podcasts presents the Bret Baier Podcast with Fox News Chief Political Anchor Bret Baier.
I think the potential in the Gaza Strip is unbelievable. The Riviera of the Middle East, this could be something that could be so bad. This could be so magnificent. But more importantly than that is the people that have been absolutely destroyed that live there now can live in peace in a much better situation because they're living in hell.
Well, as President Trump talking about Gaza, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is heading to the White House. Let's bring in Fox News senior strategic analyst, retired General Jack Keane. General, thanks for being here.
Yeah, great.
They have a lot to talk about, but obviously top on the agenda is coming to some kind of strategic end to Israel-Hamas, right?
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, we're on the cusp of major strategic change in the Middle East, and obviously it grew out of the tactical success that Iran, Hezbollah, and obviously Hamas led the October 7th attack. It was a successful tactical attack, but it's led to their strategic defeat. We had a 12-day war. Iran's been militarily defeated. The nuclear program conservatively has been set back by some kind of years, for sure. Hezbollah and Hamas have been decimated. They've lost their strategic platform in Syria because Hezbollah can no longer provide the ground force to prop up the Assad regime.
By the way, let me interrupt. Did you find it interesting that there was a message from the ambassador, Barak, that the U.S. ambassador to Turkey, that Hezbollah is a political organization? Isn't that just a signal that they're going to try to get Lebanon and Syria maybe in the Abraham Accord or something?
Yeah, well, that's part of the strategic shift. Hezbollah has always been a major military organization organized to export terrorism as well, but a political reality in the politics in Lebanon and elected as such. So they've always had disproportionate political influence, but now they are considerably weaker. The Lebanese government is growing in strength, and there is potential in terms of some kind of political arrangement between Lebanon and Israel, which is another major breakthrough that could take place here.
And then Iran, obviously the successful mission. We don't know the entire status of Iran's nuclear program, but the next step here is also being talked about.
Yeah. Well, certainly after the military defeat that handed to them and the United States' decisive action led by the president, obviously to shut down the remnants of their nuclear program, we went immediately to a ceasefire. Obviously, they had to agree to that. And now there's discussions about another diplomatic initiative to bring Iran to the negotiating table. Well, that could be positive if they're willing to let inspectors in and review their entire nuclear enterprise and make sure that what remains to be dismantled. I think my own judgment is that Iran is not giving up the idea of having a nuclear weapon. They're probably assessing the damage, and their intention would be put a plan together, recover, and rebuild. They always plan to accept a strike, thinking they could survive it and have some remnants of the program together. I think they will use diplomatic negotiations as a cover to rebuild their program. But nonetheless, they are back on their heels. Syria, as an example, I mean, think about this. They are having a non-aggression pact discussion with Israel. Think of that. If that comes to fruition, that in itself is a change. When you think about the Saudis, if ending the war in Gaza and rebuilding, as you introduced here with President Trump, Gaza into something that the Gazan people can finally have some security and maybe even some economic well-being as a result of it, if that's the new predicate instead of a Palestinian state, we may be closer to normalization.
But the fact
Saudi
that
Arabia.
the defense minister, KBS, Khaled Sheikh Mohammed, the younger brother of the Crown Prince, MBS, was secretly brought into the White House on Thursday to deliver a message from his brother on a number of fronts, including Iran and including Gaza, suggests that they're moving. I mean, there's a shift.
Yeah, and I think that if the new predicate is what I think it is, and it's not a Palestinian state, I think this could go much more rapidly than we think. And for our audience to understand, Saudi Arabia Once they normalize relations with Israel, and by the way, they were close to doing that, and that is why Hamas initiated attack. And in Sinwar's own words, that was the prime motivator to shut it down. So if that can be renewed, if Saudi does normalize, so will all the other Arab countries in the region. That is major paradigm shift. The Middle East will be reset, and the chances for stability and peace are completely on the horizon.
Let me turn to the other obvious focus and put up a map of Ukraine. There's still some heavy fighting. Russia is still launching big attacks. There have been attacks the other way. There was some confusion about whether we were drawing down weapons going to Ukraine. What's your sense of things?
Well, Russia has been making steady tactical gains, but no major operational breakthroughs. They haven't captured a major city or a provincial capital in a couple of years. 40-plus months into the war, they cannot take control of Ukraine if the United States military assistance remains and if the Europeans' assistance remains. If we pull ours out of there, they likely would take it in a year, maybe two at the most. So the military assistance program is crucial, and I think to get Putin where he is right now, he's willing to maintain his military offensive campaign. He sells it as a narrative that he's really succeeding, that he's overwhelming Ukraine. That's a false narrative. If we can combine economic sanctions, which I think will likely be announced this week by the Senate, led by Blumenthal and Senator Graham, and the Europeans are going to do the same, and we commit to provide military assistance, that has the possibility of bringing Putin to the negotiating table. Sanctions by themselves won't do it. Why is that? Because Putin has always believed that he can work around it, and the evidence is on his side about that. That's the truth of it.
But it does seem like President Trump is getting frustrated by the Putin.
Oh, yeah, he absolutely is. And he's on to Putin. I mean, he knows what Putin's all about. He knows he's a thug and he's a killer, all the rest of it. He doesn't say that publicly because he wants to maintain some kind of relationship with this thug. But I think a combination of military assistance, commitment, tough economic sanctions, the possibility, there's no guarantee that he would come to the table and realize that this is going to be a lot tougher than he wants it to be.
General, always fascinating. Thanks for the time.
Yeah, great talking to you, Bret.
We'll hear more after this.
The DOJ may be releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients. Will that really happen?
It's sitting on my desk right now to review. That's been a directive by President Trump. I'm reviewing that.
She was saying the entirety of all of the paperwork, all of the paper in relation to Jeffrey Epstein's crimes. That's what the Attorney General was referring to, and I'll let her speak for that.
Well, February 21st and today at the White House, this is the DOJ and FBI put out Jeffrey Epstein had no client list, died by suicide. The systemic review revealed no incriminating client list. There was also no credible evidence found that Epstein blackmailed prominent individuals as part of his actions. After a thorough investigation, FBI investigators concluded that Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide in his cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York City on August 10th, 2019. With that, let's start there and bring in our panel. Matthew Continetti, scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, columnist at the Free Press. Josh Kraushaar is a Fox News radio political analyst. And we welcome Politico White House Bureau Chief Dasha Burns. Welcome. Dasha, you know, it's getting a lot of pushback, especially from the right, saying, you told us all this time that it's coming, and it's not coming.
Look, the original sin, the match that really lit the flame here, were those binders, those bombshell binders that had no bombshells in them. And that's when the MAGA right really started to cry foul, because there were these breadcrumbs that were left for folks, but nothing that they were actually leading to. And you have folks like Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, who initially were some of the big proponents of this sort of deep state idea that they were hiding things from the public. And then once they got in there, they saw, wait a minute, we've looked at the evidence and it's just not there. But once you rile up the MAGA right in that way, they're not going to let it go very easily. And I've been getting texts from the Laura Loomers of the world saying we need to hold these folks accountable. They want to see Pam Bondi fired over this.
It's really quite something. I asked the FBI director about part of this, the suicide part, in that interview. Take a listen. You said, as far as you know, he killed himself.
I'm telling you, he killed himself.
The other thing on the internet is the Epstein files. What's the answer to that?
The answer to that is the same as everything else. I'm not going to withhold information from the American public ever. But I'm also not going to rush to get it out there in a format in which they can't rely on it.
So, Matthew, I mean, he's kind of cut and dry there, but there's a lot of MAGA world that's not happy with this entire situation.
Well, I think when Kash Patel and Dan Bongino say something, I'm inclined to believe them, considering they've developed a lot of credibility on various issues over the past 10 years. But the problem here is, for people who don't trust the government, they're not going to accept anything the government tells them. And so just like the JFK assassination, where you see decades after continuing questions linger, I think we're going to be dealing with this Jeffrey Epstein story for a long time to come.
Josh?
We are in a low trust society, and that is part of the Trump coalition. We followed a lot of stories in the last couple of years, the UFOs and the sightings in New Jersey, the questions about vaccines that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is HHS secretary in large part because of that skepticism. So I don't think simply saying the matter is settled is going to, as Dasha was saying, is going to really settle the nerves of a lot of the folks on the MAGA right. There's still going to be a lot of questions. There is that one missing minute of the video in the footage that they released. So I think there are going to be more questions. And when you feed the beast, it keeps on asking for more.
Yeah, Dasha, a little different. There was no welcome shot. It was a little bit differently staged, and they were kind of closed press for most of this. We'll see if we get it during the show.
Well, look, the stakes are really high right now, and I think you're seeing a more somber and serious mood in the White House around the Middle East right now, because the president knows that it's still a pressure cooker. And look, he's been kind of playing out this madman theory, as some scholars would call it, but it's a madman theory with some consistency, which is that he's been very clear for a long time, even before he was in politics, that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. And he has indicated that he's willing to either not rule out the U.S. striking again, and also potentially not rule out having Israel strike again. Of course, what he wants right now, though, he wants to make the deal. He wants to get that Nobel Peace Prize, and he wants to make peace, but it is a hotbed in that region.
I want to play the soundbite from the U.S. ambassador to Turkey, and I talked about this with General Keane about Hezbollah, and it comes the day that the Israeli Prime Minister is at the White House. Take a listen.
Hezbollah is a political party. It also has a militant aspect to it. Hezbollah needs to see that there's a future for them, that road is not harnessed just solely against them, and that there's an intersection of peace and prosperity for them also.
I mean, there may be a major paradigm shift in the Middle East. Jack Keane was talking about it. Others have. We'll see.
Well, Prime Minister Netanyahu, on his way to the United States, said that one of his missions here is to expand the circle of peace for Israel. And that's what we stand at the cusp of doing, whether it's Syria, whether it's Lebanon, whether it is Saudi Arabia, whether it's possibly a deal that gets us a ceasefire and hostage relief in Gaza. I think one reason why the White House is hanging back on scheduling any appearances with Prime Minister Netanyahu is the situation is very in flux. But the key is this, Bret. Whatever peace happens in the next few weeks, it will be the result of the United States and Israel working together and increasing their strength in the region. That's the two-state solution. That's what leads to peace, the U.S. and Israel.
Mm-hmm. Josh?
It is a transformational moment, and it's in large part because Trump has taken some bold moves that have shaken up the chessboard and really degraded Iran's power in the region. Look, Iran is degraded as a result of both the U.S.-Israeli coordination on the military strikes. You could have, I think the hope is from the White House, that there is some hostage deal or a 60-day ceasefire that could lead to at least more hostages being returned home. I think the president would like to see kind of an end to the Gaza chapter and a beginning to the Abraham Accords, Saudi Arabia and other countries.
He's not afraid to buck tradition. He's not afraid to shake up the conventional wisdom and the global order in order to get things done. We've seen that with his announcement about the Gaza Riviera. We've seen that with how some of his acolytes have done their work overseas, and some of the unsavory characters that they've been willing to sit across the table from to make a deal.
He has seen movement, as I mentioned, in the Middle East. We'll see if there's more movement. What he hasn't seen movement, Dasha, on is Ukraine and Russia, and in part because I think he's very disappointed in his conversations with Vladimir Putin.
He's getting increasingly frustrated with Putin. You've seen that. The question is he going to eventually go the sanctions route? I interviewed Secretary of State Marco Rubio in NATO, and he seemed to think that it is not time to do that yet. They want to give Russia a little bit of space to operate, but you've seen in both his public appearances and his Truth Social posts, the president is increasingly getting fed up.
But Josh, he's got to put the pinch on him someplace.
Yeah, I think that there's a bill in the Senate that Lindsey Graham has been championing, and it'll be a big test if President Trump gets behind that bill to put more pressure and more sanctions on Russia.
It's sitting in that back pocket.
Sanctions and frozen assets, that's the only leverage we have, and I think it's past time we use it to force Putin to know that we're serious about reaching a ceasefire in Ukraine.
All right, panel, thanks.
Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.